Right, members, welcome everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. So just benefit, we are recording this meeting. I'm Claire Reid, Head of Strategy and Performance. I'm just going to sit in the chair to do the election of chairperson, and then I will hand over to the chairperson. So for the first item, election of chairperson, do I have any nominations, please, for chairperson? Thank you. Supposedly is proposing Mr. Petrinos, seconded by Mike Ellicott. Thank you. Mr. Petrinos, are you happy to stand? Thank you very much. Is everybody please in favour of Mr. Petrinos chairing this meeting? Everybody is in favour. Thank you very much. Duly elected. And over to you.
And now we need to deal with the election of the deputy chairperson. Do I have any nominations? Any seconders?
Yes, because otherwise somebody else will get.
Are you happy with us doing that?
I'm very happy. Have we had one before? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it
Evelyn was previously. She isn't here.
Oh, no, well, no, I don't know. I didn't want to deprive anybody else of the.
All those in favour?
Okay.
Oh, that's a big answer. Any apologies for absence?
Evelyn, Stacey.
Minutes. So we have on the agenda the minutes of the meeting of 9th of November. Would anybody like to make any comments on whether they're accurate or otherwise? Or move them? If you like, I'll go through them one at a time. Item 6, minutes. Item 7 was the review of member conduct when we took Chair's report and report. Item 8 was about dispensations to all authority members. Item 9 was about standing orders for regulation of contracts. We didn't change anything. Item 10 was complaints received from April to September 21. Oh, sorry, I didn't read these. Which one was that?
On 8 rather, sorry, dispensation to authority members. It was resolved to grant the following dispensation for 4 years to all authority members who are elected members of COPTA members in another public authority. Why 4 years? I'm sorry, I can't quite remember why it would be 4 years, and bearing in mind now that all the Somerset parish councils and the new Somerset Unity councils have actually been elected for 5 years, it won't coincide certainly with anything that they're doing. I just wonder why 4 years? Because it was 4 years.
I think the simple answer is that it's a legislative requirement. So it's in, I believe, the Localism Act, and Devon County Council has the same 4-year. We can only have a dispensation for up to 4 years. So, when we get close to the 4 years, we can issue. Another dispensation can be issued at that point.
Thank you very much. That's very.
Well, can I ask, what about when those members that this refers to have changed authority? Is that significant, and will we need to redispensate?
Oh, so sorry, I'm not sure I follow.
No, you just do it every 4 years.
Well, say a member was on West Somerset Council and then became a member of the new Somerset Unitary Authority.
This dispensation will cover that because it relates to other public authorities, so it doesn't specify. It doesn't name individual authorities.
So it'll just be 4 years for us, and then we renew it for another 4 years, and it's just what applies to this authority.
I think. Sync, isn't it? Sorry, anyway. Item 9, standing orders for regulation of contracts. I think we. Yeah. Item 10, complaints from April to September in 21. 11, member training requirements. 12, urgent business, where we hear about Carl. Anything? Would anybody like to move them as correct? Thank you, Mike. Seconder? Stephen? All in favour? Thanks. And, matters arising from those, well, we've done that, hasn't we? Item 5, the annual report of the Standards Committee.
Thank you. So I'll just start off, and Carl might want to add anything in. So this report is in effect just reviewing the work of the Standards Committee over the last year as required in our standing orders. So it reflects on a lot of the same things we've just been discussing in terms of review of standing orders. Particular item of note is the fact that we reviewed the member code of conduct in the light of the Local Government Association Councillor model code of conduct and made some changes. We introduced the dispensation to authority members that we've just been discussing, we undertook a number of training sessions with members. The complaints and compliments, there aren't a lot to report from this period. One stage 1 complaint, and then quite a number of compliments as well. So that was the sort of the bulk of the items I wanted to cover. I will hand over to Carl if he wishes to say anything in relation to the national standards arrangements. The only thing just to add is that normally at this point in time we have a discussion around future training requirements. So if there is anything that members wish to raise or questions, then please do so. But before we do, Carl, is there anything you wish to add to that? Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful if I just expand on paragraph 8, which is the review of national standards arrangements. So there are 2 updates here. In March of this year, the government provided its response to the Committee on Standards in Public Life report on local government ethical standards. The Local Government Ethical Standards report was published in January 2019 and included 26 recommendations. A number of these recommendations would require legislative changes. However, in general, the government's view was that local authorities could better make these recommendations or better take them forward as best practice. The Committee on Standards in Public Life expressed disappointment that over 3 years elapsed before the government responded, and that the government response rejected most of the recommendations, whilst accepting just a few of them in principle. I thought it might be helpful to just run through a few examples of some of the recommendations and the government's response, just to give you a flavor. So one of the recommendations was to grant authorities a power to suspend members without allowances for up to 6 months. Another recommendation on a similar vein was to permit members a right of appeal to the local government ombudsman if a sanction of suspension is imposed on the subject member. The government's response to both of these recommendations was that there is no provision for such a sanction in legislation, and that this was a deliberate policy decision. The government felt that this would impinge on free speech and that existing sanctions are adequate, and ultimately that members are held to account at the ballot box. Another recommendation was to abolish criminal offenses under the Localism Act relating to disclosable pecuniary interests. The government's response was that it does not agree with this recommendation and feels that the criminal offense of a non-disclosure of a pecuniary interest is a necessary and proportionate safeguard and deterrent against corruption. Another recommendation was to amend the relevant authorities' disclosable pecuniary interest regulations so that members do not have to register their home address on an authority's register of interests. The government responded that it agrees with the principle behind this recommendation, and it will consider amending the regulations. To date, this hasn't happened, but the government, said that it was happy in principle with this. The last recommendation that I'll just mention for awareness is that the Localism Act should be amended to require that independent persons are appointed for a fixed term of 2 years, renewable once. The government responded to this recommendation to say that it doesn't accept this and it would be unworkable, citing feedback from monitoring officers that indicate that in practice this would be unachievable, as there's often a small pool of people willing and capable of undertaking the role and also meeting the stringent specifications of being an independent person. So the second update and shorter update is that the Committee on Standards in Public Life launched its Leading in Practice review in March of this year. The Leading Practice review is looking at how to build and sustain a climate of ethical behavior in organizations, and specifically looking at the role of leadership in all levels. The committee is currently speaking to public sector institutions and is looking at good practice in the private and third sectors. The committee intends to publish its report in early 2023, so I expect we'll have a further update after that takes place. So I'll pass back to members.
Does anybody have any comments, members, or specifically any ideas about member training requirements?
Sounds like I dodged a bullet there.
Yes.
I think I would assume that the new members have a package of training arranged anyway.
They have induction. Yes, they have an induction session, and then join the training list of members.
Yeah, personally, I've always found the updates that Dean gives on particular aspects of planning in the members' briefing or as part of quite useful, which no doubt because of the new structure of the authority could be brought forward into the main body of the authority meeting. First part, when this isn't too heavy.
So yes, I think that regular planning training is really important, and making sure that members, because there is something to churn, and it never hurts anyway to remind members of exactly what they should do, how they should behave, and sometimes how they are seen, perceived, both now on camera as well as in the body of the room. It would almost be worth actually, and I don't think we've had this yet, doing a session on saying, right, this is the film of your meeting.
Yeah.
And this is what you look like. Because I have other people that tell me I watched this and it was absolutely dreadful and all the secret and pathetic. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm engaged, you know, the people playing on their phones, looking as though they would rather be elsewhere, and there are all sorts of things about that. So I think a little, maybe a bit of perception training.
I agree, and I think it's talking about that you would be very very suited to lead on.
Very much.
Sorry, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I mean certainly we could do that. I mean it was more of an issue when the Zoom Teams meeting first started, that clearly a lot of you weren't used to the concept of being on television. Whereas I started off in local radio and moved to television. So I know that you don't ever do anything on camera that you wouldn't like to see as a YouTube clip. Whereas there were people eating, knitting, wandering off in the middle of discussions and doing all sorts of things in the early. But then it settled down and people got used to it. So I don't know that it's so much of an issue now. Are you interjecting?
I was just going to say that we had been thinking of, in the autumn, we normally do some sort of training around kind of conduct, don't we? So it may be that as part of that, we could just introduce, an element of viewing a short clip of some element of one of our meetings, just to see. I think the point about the perception is quite interesting. It wouldn't hurt just to have a look at that, and then we'll talk about other elements perhaps that you might be able to help us with in terms of conduct generally.
I
Obviously,
think I'm
the point about
booked in for attendance.
Well, if I can just the only thing is, it may be a bit confrontational for some members that maybe something is noticed, but that's my only.
I was about to say, I'm not sure that picking on a bit of film from a couple of years ago, where there are actually existing members doing things that might be regrettable, would be a good thing to use as a training.
What I thought might be is to say to members, right, this meeting is the one that we're going to look at in the autumn.
Yes.
So please be aware of how you're behaving in this meeting, because we will be looking at it in detail.
As a training exercise.
So at least they're warned.
Yes.
To be on the best behaviour.
Like that.
I don't think we're suggesting we're going to pick on people and to pick up things specifically. I think it's more, as Stephen says, the perception of how it looks. I mean, the issue about people looking on their phones was something we discussed previously, wasn't it? Because there was a perception that you're not actually, participating in the meeting. But obviously,
But actually, sometimes, like me, I look at some of the papers on my phone.
You're looking at the papers
Or
or
bits of
bits of information relevant, so that there is that perception. So I think that was more, or what we would like to look at really. The other thing that I just flag is that we have in the past had study tours as well. We haven't done that recently because of COVID. We did say we would look to reintroduce that if circumstances allowed. We've been thinking about maybe whether we could do some sort of housing, go and have a look at some housing in the autumn. I think that's a little bit still, let's see how things go with COVID, because there is expected to be more, cases coming up. So I've put that forward as, an idea that we might be able to do, but at the moment we're not kind of committing to it just because of, expecting some of the COVID levels to increase. So that was the thoughts that, we might, and the other one that we said we would do was, it's not specifically on training, but we have some training around climate change. And we do have a proposal in the autumn to have a seminar with partners following up on climate change, looking at the carbon footprint work that we've been doing for the national parks. So those are just some of the things that are in plan at the moment.
I'm sure that's going to become more important.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, we always have a difference of opinion with members on various aspects of planning, for example, and whether the members fit in with policy. So training on planning and policy, I think, is very, very important. But we also need to do some training on declarations of interest. There are times when we sail very close to the wind on declarations of interest. My concern is that in a minute somebody's going to pick up the fact that somebody's taken part in a meeting that hasn't declared the correct declaration of interest and challenge us on that. And it would be regrettable if that happened. To protect ourselves, we need to emphasize, like even I get confused sometimes on a procurement interest or deciding which one I'm going to step out of. But in general, I've always worked on the assumption that if in doubt, walk out. That's what I've always said. And that's how I work. But I sit in some of the meetings sometimes, and you can hear comments being made that you think never ought to be made by that person. And that is concerning to me.
In terms of the authority's reputation.
Yes, because if we were challenged, and nowadays it's so important because they're filmed, they're recorded and filmed, so there's no hiding under the table even. It's clearly out in the open where it should be, Don't get me wrong, I'm quite happy that it should be, but I do think that and training doesn't hurt anybody. It just reinforces people's mind as to what they should be saying and not saying.
Isn't it, it's up to the person, the individual, to declare their interests, isn't it? It's not up to anybody else to, I can't come to, I should not come to you and say, didn't declare an interest.
No, I know.
That's not the way it's done, is it?
But it is challengeable.
You can challenge somebody, but
It's not by us,
no.
but by an
Can we have
by
could we ask the experts?
There have been a couple of occasions when I've been surprised that a member has stayed in the room and has voted on some decisions where I would have expected them to declare an interest and leave the room because it was borderline, if you like. And if that particular planning application was one that somebody chose to raise an objection about and challenge the authority, and had it gone to a decision that was one vote, which a few of them had at the time,
Yes.
then the authority could find that it had made an illegal decision. And you would have the whole trouble and expense of going through it again and fighting somebody with a reasonable case. As it happens, in every single case where it's happened, it hasn't come down to one vote. And it hasn't been that the person who shouldn't have been in the room has voted against the person who was putting the planning application in. And therefore, they're not going to challenge the fact that, for the sake of argument, you stayed in the room, even though they knew you well, because you voted for them.
Yes.
But had it gone the other way, it would have been open to challenge. And I've been a little uncomfortable about that. And Mike and I, over the years, a couple of informal discussions saying, I'm slightly surprised that person, and we've had similar discussions, and we actually went back when you were chair. And of all the complaints that have come in formally, some of the early ones were sorted out by the solicitor and me in informal discussions, where we didn't think the complaint that was being made was a reasonable one. Had that person complained on different grounds, then they'd have been right. But it was just that they claimed that the complaint they made was the wrong complaint.
I suppose to some extent, if the person has actually has an interest,
Yes.
like you're saying, either get up and leave, or in fact, they could sit there but not vote.
Exactly. They could sit there and not vote if it was marginal,
Not have a discussion.
or they could only intervene in the discussion at the point that something was wrong that was said, and they were intervening to correct a matter of fact. But where you have the case where it's a contentious discussion and they want to lead that discussion and suggest a certain course of action, you shouldn't be trying to persuade your colleagues anyway. And at the point that somebody like that is pitching in and starting the discussion, it makes me very nervous.
Stephen.
But it is very much their responsibility
Yes, it is.
to take the decision themselves, to recuse themselves. And all we can do is to make sure that they are trained to a pitch
Exactly.
where they understand that
Yes.
very clearly. And if they still choose to misbehave, unfortunately, that is
That's their right.
their right.
Yes.
That's right to be wrong.
The second point I'd like to raise on this, which is where, as an authority, you have decided on a policy. I can't remember the exact size, but for the sake of argument, agricultural tied properties have to be 92 square meters or something. So you've gone through all the deliberations, you had 3 years of discussing it, you've decided to adopt that as a policy. And then in the next meeting, somebody pipes up that they think that this house that's being applied for isn't big enough and that they should be allowed a bigger one. Well, if you've disagreed with the policy that the authority has adopted, probably you should raise it in the members' forum and other places, not during an actual planning application. If you see what I mean. Yes.
I do understand.
Unless there is a material reason why, in this particular instance, you think it should be bigger. But to say, I don't think the planning officers are right in this, and to blame your staff is brings the authority into general disrepute, if you like.
Yes, and you shouldn't blame the
Yes,
planning officers. However,
exactly.
however, as we've discussed often,
Yes.
sorry, Mr. Chair.
I beg your pardon.
The applications on the whole do not come to us
I know.
for consideration unless there is some element of contention.
Yes.
And it is therefore open to members to say, this is what the officers have interpreted the plan as being. However, I believe that there was another interpretation we should put on it. So I'm perfectly happy with that, providing they ground their contention in the plan.
Yes.
And indeed, what we have had recently is a very particular case, but it's a sort of a recurring theme actually about business development in open countryside.
Yes.
Particularly in relation to timber.
Yes.
What we're doing, I think, now is to try to resolve some of those policy discussions in our PPAG meetings, one of which will follow this one, so that we can informally work our way through those considerations, even if it means that, as happened last time, very rarely, the planning officer says,
Yes.
I think that we are in danger of contravening the plan, and therefore
Yes.
I'm asking that we pause this for a month. But that's a perfectly proper thing to do, because that's what our standing orders allow you to do.
Yes.
So rather than blundering on and members perhaps taking a decision which the planning officers would be deeply uncomfortable with and could be opening a floodgate, we've got the opportunity to tease out those issues before it goes back to the planning commission. So I think we're conscious of the.
I was here for that particular planning application because it came up in the annual general meeting. But sorry, I'll shut up. But what I was concerned about was members in particular at meetings, criticising officers for making decisions that are in line with policies that you as members have passed.
Sure, and I think that has decreased.
And that has decreased. And you've started making people give a reason.
Oh, absolutely.
But yes. Under some previous chairs, going back several years, that never used to happen. People just used to make it, say, I think this, and not give you a reason why.
The point though is that we need some training.
I would like to see an element of training on that, where the appropriate point to bring things you disagree with up is.
Is there anything else on the report you would like to raise? We have some recommendations to note it and as we have done, just discuss training needs. So I take it is somebody going to move that?
So,
In favour? Right. On to the next item, annual governance review.
Carl, are you happy to start off with this one?
Yeah, that's fine. So Gordon sends his apologies. So I'll take you through the report. So the report is divided into two sections, the annual governance review and the draft annual governance statement, which is appended to the report and is contained in the draft accounts, which are presented to the authority. So turning to the first part, the annual governance review, the authority is following the SIPFA and SOLACE framework, which is based upon 7 principles of good governance. Each of these principles are set out in paragraph 1.3 of the report. The annual governance review goes through each of these principles and describes how they are applied and provides in-year commentary that provides details on any recent changes or developments. I would like to draw the Standards Committee's attention to a few of these developments. The first is that the Rural Enterprise Exmoor Vision was completed in the summer of 2021 and adopted by members in August 2021. Exmoor has been engaging in partnership working, such as the Exmoor Non-Native Invasive Species Program with Southwest Water and the Get Involved Volunteers Program with the Environment Agency. Exmoor is in the process of implementing various carbon reduction work to its properties, such as transitioning to a biomass boiler, installing renewable energy, and installing secondary glazing. The Finance and Performance Advisory Panel was set up to provide scrutiny over the budget setting process. This panel has not been able to meet for some time, and it's important that it does begin to meet soon. The anti-fraud and corruption, whistleblowing, and equality, diversity, and inclusion policies have been reviewed this year. Also, this year there is a new section, which is Section 9. This is an annual self-assessment of good practice. This section has been added in response to a recommendation of Exmoor's external auditors. So turning to the second part of the report, the appendix, Exmoor is required to conduct an annual review of the effectiveness of its systems of internal control and provide an annual governance statement. Paragraph 5 sets out significant governance issues and challenges for the current year. Now, some of the issues listed in paragraph 5.2 are ongoing challenges, while others are new. Amongst some of the newer issues and challenges are the need to undertake a review of financial regulations, understanding the implications on Exmoor's decision-making of the new Somerset Unitary Authority, which is due to come into being in April, and supporting Somerset County Council in their implementation of a new financial ledger to ensure that Exmoor's requirements are met. So I hope that summary was helpful. If there are any questions, please let myself and Claire know, and we'll do our best to answer.
I think it's very comprehensive, and I'm happy with the recommendations.
Thank you, Mike. All in favour, yes. Does anybody have any comments on the government statement or the review? No? Okay. Well, I haven't been informed of any other businesses.
There is one, sorry, Chair. Obviously, it's difficult to pick anyone in advance because we didn't know who the chairperson was going to be. Shall I just explain this one? So, you will recall at a recent meeting of the authority that one of the public speakers, Mr. Foxwell, queried why we did not minute the detail of the public speaking and the response. Certainly for authority items, we didn't feel it would be necessary for planning items. We did say that we would raise this with the Standards Committee and perhaps have some consideration of it. So I just wondered we could have a quick conversation about it now, but perhaps this will be something to consider in detail at our next meeting.
Mr. Foxwood did actually speak to me, not here, but when I was at another meeting, he sort of buttonholed me on that. And one of the discussions was that though he understood that in normal circumstances it wasn't limited, there was an example that he said he told me about where it was minuted. And he was saying, why is it when it's minuted on one issue and not minuted on another issue?
So I think historically we haven't tended to make recordings, to minute them because they're recorded, so people can go and view. I think they are sometimes referenced in the minutes if the member debate references them. So that's the sort of the difference. Right. So sometimes the public speaker speaks and then the agenda moves on. Sometimes they do go back to refer to the items that the public speaker is raising. But this is, it's something that we can look at.
Yeah,
and, we can see whether we want to approach it differently.
Recorded, isn't it? So.
Yeah.
Yes, all right.
Just quickly, because John wasn't actually here for that meeting, the member of the public spoke quite movingly at length, but without any specifics at all about the fact that the authority doesn't seem to do much for farmers these days. I think that was the gist of it. And that farming didn't seem to have any consideration at all in the authority's decisions anymore, that he had brought this up several times with the chairman, and that still nothing had changed, and there was no mention of this concern in any of the minutes or discussions by the authority in anything.
This is on a planning issue.
No,
No, this was just speaking as members of the public before the AGM. Okay, so there wouldn't actually have been, if I had been taking the minutes, as I used to do as a parish clerk hundreds of years ago, there wasn't actually anything in what he said, apart from that was minutable. In the sense there were no specifics.
but actually what you just said
Yeah.
would have been minutable.
Could have been minutable.
And I think my sense is always that in the interest of transparency and openness, it is always better to actually record, even if it's only in general terms, what has been said, so that it is quite clear that the member of the public came, the member of the public spoke about, and then there is a record of that and it's transparent. And I think that would be my
I think so too.
inclination. So whether or not we want to take that further to another meeting to discuss, but I think my starting point would always be that. And had it been any member of the public that raised that issue, I would have said, yes, I think that probably is right. I think it's better to be fuller than not, because I think that shows that they're probably responsive.
And he actually couched it as I would like to raise a complaint to that, which is why I perked up and listened exactly to what he said all the way through.
And in that particular example, we did then write back and respond to all the points that he has raised. But I think this is a more general principle of, do we record the basic thrust of what the public speaking is about.
Said would have been fine.
Yes, I think so. It would have covered it.
It did actually show me the response, and he just felt that there were still items to be raised. I think he was going to respond to your response.
Okay, I haven't received
I don't know.
anything.
That is.
I don't know if Robin has, but I haven't received anything.
Yes.
Okay. So we will take that forward. Sorry, just to confirm, we will take that forward, and if we need to bring anything back to the standards committee, we'll do that next time. But we've got a feel from you that you would like us to.
That was the only item.
That's the only item.
And it was well, that's the end of the standing committee, so closed at 10:25. Oh no, that's wrong. 10:23.
Thank you. And thank you, Carl, for joining us.
Thank you very much.